Thank you. Well, it's dark and atmospheric.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. So very, very welcome this evening to what I hope will be a very special and unusual evening here at the UnHerd Club. We want to be beyond politics, beyond these little corners of science and religion and culture where all of these arguments are taking place in separate silos, because a lot of the most interesting stuff, a lot of the most meaningful things happen in the spaces in between, and there are very few people who are able to navigate those spaces, and I think we have one of them with us here tonight.
It's very kind of you.
Yeah, I don't need to give him too much of an introduction, but obviously Nick Cave is an incredible musician who has been performing for, I think, more than 4 decades. I think that's right.
Something like that.
Over a variety of styles. He began as a punk, gothic performer in the beginnings of the ends of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, through lyrical, beautiful ballads, right up to the more recent material, which is much more celestial, I would say, experimental, poetic, always evolving, always changing, always relevant. But what's interesting and what is so special is that he's broken out of just music. He's now increasingly also, as well as an actor, a screenwriter, he is also a writer and a thinker and a talker. His beautiful book, Faith, Hope,
and Carnage.
Thank you. Which is what we are partly here to talk about, came out recently, but he has done a tour of In Conversation events where he's just talking, and he has an amazing website called the Red Hand Files, where fans and people to whom he means a lot write in with problems and questions, and he answers them and communicates directly with them. So he has been on a journey, and this is part of that. So welcome.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, actually, and to talk to you people and see how it goes.
Yes.
I'm a little nervous, to be honest.
So
something about UnHerd that makes me a little nervous.
Well, I can't think what that would be. I thought where we might start is something that really struck me from reading the book and kind of immersing myself in your songs in recent weeks, is this sense that to a superficial eye, to a immediate observation, it might feel like you're unrecognisably changed since the early years. Those early gigs, the birthday party, where you're kind of writhing around and it's full of noise and almost screaming and it's full of anger, and now you are much more at peace, or you seem, you are a church-going person. You've had, I think, 2 archbishops interview you in the past 2 months. The archbishops are lining up.
There's one other one, I think.
There's one to come.
Living, that's still I haven't done.
So it might seem that you're completely the opposite, from being this countercultural person to being a conservative person. But what comes through is actually there are strands that connect the earlier you to the new you. How would you start by explaining to people whether you're the same person?
Well, there's a bunch of things you said in there that I'm not sure is necessarily true. There may be a conservative edge to things, but that word I would use cautiously. But there's certainly, I think, a similar delight I got in the early days, that I get these days, which is sort of fucking with people to some degree. There is something about living outside the expectations of other people that is energizing. And certainly in the old days, with the birthday party and that sort of thing, they were extremely energetic, extremely, I would say, violent, aggressive concerts done by a not fully formed person, shall we say, that held the world in contempt as a sort of default setting, pretty much everything. And that was the kind of energy of those concerts. And that has changed completely, I would say, to the way that I am now, in that I see the world in a completely different way. and see human beings in a completely different way. I see the sort of brokenness of human beings, but also the unbelievable value or valuableness of human beings. And this is something that I could never imagined I would have felt back then. And I think that has something to do with becoming a more complete person through a series of things that have happened to me through my life, or that happened to us all, probably.
There's also a sense, I mean, if we go into the creative process, which you write beautifully about in this book, there's a thread of continuity there too, because there's a sense that these songs are not just something you're synthesizing out of nothing. They're almost out there, and you're kind of trying to find them. There's almost when you talk about it, it almost feels like there's a magical or a mystical component to the creative process.
I wish there was more of that. But actually, my creative process is extremely rigorous, and it's just hard work. And it begins at 9 o'clock in the morning. I sit down and I start writing, if I'm writing songs, which I am at the moment. And it finishes at 5:30 in the afternoon. And then I don't do any other creative stuff after that, apart from things like this, shall we say. But basically, within that context, within that time, there is a very troubled relationship with my muse and with that is fraught and full of anxiety and not a very nice place at all. And what I'm getting is meager scraps of songs that slowly make their way into something that's of some kind of value. The mystical thing that I'm sort of, that there's a big pencil in the sky that's writing my lyrics for me, it's not really like that. I wish it was more like that. But.
Is there, though, a sense that these songs kind of get a life of their own? And you've written about how sometimes they almost seem to predict what happens, or they seem to transverse what we would consider the rational world.
Yeah, I think there is an element of that goes on. It's hard to talk about without sounding ridiculous, but I think that there is, from my experience, the songs seem to know a little bit more about what's going on than I myself do. And even though I'm working in a very conscious way to get songs written, I don't have any control over their outcome in the end. I find I've just written stuff that often surprises me, that these songs, I mean, the songs that I'm writing now surprise me hugely as to where they're actually going. Not that I really want to talk about that, because it's just too early to talk about that, but I have 12, 13 songs that feel good, and they are just in a direction that I had that I realise I've actually had no control over the whole time.
Do you feel like freedom and a sense of being kind of relaxed is part of the creative process? I mean, this is where maybe kind of the atmosphere of wider society can be relevant to that. Do you feel like, I mean, you talked about how, for example, there's a quote from one of your books, the vitalizing element in art is the one that baffles or challenges or outrages. As a young musician, I felt it was my sacred duty to offend. There's that kind of break things, scream and shout.
Yeah.
That's part of the creative process. Is that still part of the creative process?
Yeah, I mean, I come from I don't want to sit here and say that my generation was better than your generation or whatever, but I did come from a generation where there was self-evident truths that I still fully believe in, such as free speech being a good thing, that are an energizing factor towards what I do. And the idea that you can offend people, or that your songs can be dangerous enough, let's say, that people are scared of them, is exciting for me. It's not something that you should that I personally feel I need to shy away from. And you know, I have a bunch of songs that are, I'm not so sure I write them in that same way anymore, but I have other interests, I think. It's not that I shy away from that sort of thing because I'm worried about the outcome or what people might think. It's just that I have other fish to fry these days.
I mean, this is not drawing politics into it, but do you feel like the atmosphere of the culture more generally is now more, people have to be more careful?
How long's it been? 12 minutes.
No, you know, we talk about the space in between these things, and actually I think that it's a really important thing. The idea that this isn't a kind of culture war question, or it's not about, you know, head banging, being furious about council culture. It's like, does this actually impinge on the creative faculty in some way?
Of course it does. I mean, if you're writing into a censorious mood, a fragile, brittle mood, and you're worried about that, then of course you second guess what you're writing about, and this is just not good for the business of songwriting, as far as I'm concerned.
Does that happen to you? Have you had any contact with that? Second guessing, that self-censorship?
Oh, should I say this or should I not? Yeah. Only as much as I would have 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I mean, you always think, is this a good thing or a bad thing? But I don't think of it on terms of whether it's an offensive thing or not. I just think, is this a good line or is this a bad line? So, no, I don't feel that I do that. However, I do feel it is that there has been, I would say, a kind of wet blanket that's been thrown over art in general. And this is just not good. However,
what is that wet blanket? It's just
what is a wet blanket?
What is that wet blanket?
What is the wet blanket?
Yeah.
Well, a squeamish, censorious, a merciless, you know, the idea that there are certain things that you can get away with saying and certain things that you can't get away with saying. I get tired of hearing people say, well, you can't say this. You know, I think this, but you can't say this. And that's reflective of a mood, but I don't think it's true. I don't think there are things that you can't say. You just need to take the consequences of saying certain sorts of things. Now, these are brutal and merciless and unjust, and sometimes. And it's distressing to see these things happen. But at the same time, I work in songwriting in particular, and the form is abstract in its nature. So you can say all sorts of things through songwriting that approaches these sort of matters in a crab-like or sideways abstracted way, and you can actually say all sorts of things actually in songwriting without we were talking, we had lunch together, and I'm talking about a particular song of mine called Stagger Lee. This is a famous Bad Seeds song. I don't know if anyone here knows that song. And there, within that song, it sort of is offensive on many, many levels. I won't go through all the different sorts of people that it offends, but it's pretty much everybody. And it's a highly problematic song. But it's sort of spoken sung over this crawling music, predatory music. But in all my days of playing this song, and that's hundreds of times of looking out into the audience, I have never seen anybody looking kind of askance or offended at it. They're just swept up within the music itself. So what I mean to say is that there's all sorts of things that can be said within the context of music and art that's problematic, but at the same time just hugely enjoyable.
You've talked about that strange year of 2020, and you've talked about a mood that was sort of released in the world in 2020 that you picked up. White Elephant is the song in Carnage. And in it, you talk about this sense of rage being released in the world. I just wonder what your feelings are about that.
About that song?
Yeah, well, how you experienced that very intense, very strange year, basically. I mean, it was a really changing year for the culture. Obviously, the lockdowns were happening. That was really intense. What did you observe during that year?
Within the culture or on a personal level?
Both?
Well, I kept thinking I was going to die early on. That was not good.
Yeah.
You know, that we didn't know what was going to happen to us. I mean, I remember that very, very well, of literally walking out into a crowd and not knowing if this was like some sort of the big one or something like that. However, but what happened to me personally is that I suddenly couldn't tour for a year. I had a year's worth of touring booked, and I remember being with my manager and him on the phone, and we're finding out everything's cancelled. We're not going on tour. And this was, I had 15 minutes of feeling like, oh my God, my life. And then after that, this sudden burst of joy that I wasn't going on tour, and I suddenly had a year off. And within that year, it was like this vacuum of all this stuff started to pour out, of all other things that I hadn't had the time to do. So it was hugely creative for me that year, including writing this book, which set me off on another course in a way. And there were things that were going on within that year that were alarming, and kind of, we were all swept up into some degree and then reactive towards. I mean, White Elephant, I think, is a beautiful song and a beautiful lyric, I think, that dares to be surreal and comic about what was going on within the Black Lives Matter movement, or certainly the overreach that we saw after a while of, and how that was animating the right. You know, that's about as close as I can get to writing a political song.
Because normally you think politics would kill a song. Is that right?
Personally, I don't much like politics in music. I just don't. Personally, I just don't like it. I don't like it because I don't like being told what I should or should not think. You know, there are protest songs that are brilliant and did their work, and of course we need them. But personally, they're not the sort of songs that I listen to. You know, like if we look at someone like Nina Simone, she did a whole raft of protest songs, but they're not the songs that, to me, are the songs that really that are the songs that are really full of rage. It's her love songs that she manages to sing, these beautiful love songs, but you can feel this sort of boiling rage underneath everything, and that's much more interesting to me than hearing her sing, civil rights protest song.
I guess what I'm thinking about when we talk about these common threads is almost like much more than politics or much more than these minor issues. The big rebellion that connects what you've been talking about with the Archbishop of Canterbury to your earliest songs is a kind of rejection of a secular, rationalist world where magic isn't possible and where things are just a machine. I mean, do you think that that's true? Do you think of yourself as a rational person?
Well, I'm certainly skeptical of my beliefs, put it that way. Why I like going to church, why I go to church is because church seems to be a kind of ordered place where that allows me not to believe as much as it allows me to believe. And I have these things, both of these things going on inside me, doubt about things but I don't feel, it feels disingenuous in some way to reject these feelings, these intimations and yearnings and whispered intimations and softly spoken feelings about things that I don't know what to do with. And they are religious in nature. And I find that I can go into a church that allows me to do something with these feelings, to organize my spiritual nature, which without church, it's just all over the shop. It's just, and I'm an ordered, weirdly ordered person, and in my work methods, and church to some degree is an ordering device as well that I find helpful, you know.
You've actually said that you are religious but not spiritual in that. I mean, is that something...
I was just winding people up, I think.
Do you think that ritual, though, do you think doing things like going to church, doing things like regularly is part of how you access that whole world?
I think that's with my work. It's sitting at my desk and at a particular time each day and doing this work is an ordering principle that allows me to, that sort of ring fences my imagination and allows me to focus in on things. And church is a similar way for my
Has that always been
spiritual
true? Is this more recent, or has that always been the case?
With my creative life?
Well, with your religious life.
Well, I've always worked creatively, no matter what condition I was in. I've always got up in the morning and done my work. I've always gone to church on and off, or at least I've gone to church on and off all through my life since I was actually a choir boy when I was 13 or something like that. I've continued to try out church, you know, and...
does it feel different in recent years?
Yes, it does. I mean, I used to go to church and find reasons not to believe. Now I go to church, I think, and find reasons that are a bit more compelling.
What about the figure? I mean, this is going to be like an incredibly unfashionable question, which you probably wouldn't be asked by many other people, but what about the figure of Christ?
Yeah,
what is it
Mojo magazine never get to.
What is it about the figure of Christ that moves you?
Yeah, it's weird that, because as far back as I can remember, even as a very small child, I've had an uncommon interest in Christ. Even as a young boy. And in church, way before I had any notions of God or anything like that, there was just this sort of eerie, kind of haunted figure that I was just interested in, and as if it was kind of bred in me in some kind of way. And so I've always just had a interest and an attraction and a relationship, an emotional relationship with this deeply haunted story. And I still do, you know. That doesn't mean that I buy it all or anything like that. I just feel I relate in some way to the Christ story. Right up to the withdrawal of God and you know, I just relate to it.
Do you also relate to the devil? Because Nick has done this incredible series of ceramic figurines, sculptures, and they're these like little Staffordshire pottery things, all about the life of the devil, and there are 17 of them, and they're just amazing to see. And I just thought,
thank you.
Why? What brought you to do that?
You know, they are the life of the devil in 17. They're like the Stations of the Cross. Only there's 17 of them, and so there are 17 little meditations on the life of the devil being born, but the devil is essentially just this man with horns, and
because the devil inherits the earth.
He inherits the earth. He gets, he goes to war. He comes back from war. He gets married. He kills a child. He is in remorse. He dies a bloody death, and it's quite. I'm very proud of these things, and I guess it's kind of autobiographical in some way. Not that I relate to the devil in his evilness, but relate to the devil as a character seeking forgiveness in some way.
You've talked in an incredibly moving way about the tragic period that you have gone through recently. You lost your 15-year-old son to a terrible accident, and what you did, instead of, I guess, what many people would do, which is close in and hide away from the world, you did this extraordinary thing of opening yourself up to the world after that dark time, and that's when you started having these in-conversation events and sort of talking to fans. What has that process done to you, do you think?
It's certainly changed. The sort of regard when my son died, I just got a lot of letters coming into my house that were from people that weren't just sort of commiserating with me, but were saying, "Look, this has happened to me, and this is what I understand what you're going through." And these things just meant a huge amount to me at the time, and I think they just took a person that was completely demolished and forced me to sort of turn around and look at the world in some way. Someone that was kind of completely absorbed with my own hurt and despair, to sort of turn me inside out to see the world in some way. It was a very beautiful thing. It wasn't immediate, it was a gradual thing. But I think that's what I meant by the person that we were talking about in the birthday party or my earlier life as a half-formed person. I think that the death of my son, to some degree, completed me as a human being, and allowed me to turn around and see the world and see everyone in it as suffering individuals, as broken individuals, and understanding this perilous nature of life and the value of life, and that just changed my outlook on things hugely, completely, to understand and respect people, all people. And
there's a sense in when you write about it that it created almost like an altered state of consciousness, the intenseness of that grief, and some of the people writing in who've suffered grief as well, to the Red Hand Files, also talk about that. And if we're talking about the kind of the rational world, the world of normal mechanistic existence, it kind of threw you into another dimension.
I think that grief destroys Well, it did for me. It destroyed the world just didn't make sense anymore. It didn't make rational sense to me, and I didn't see why I needed to sort of cleave to rational notions about things when it just didn't make any sense, and other things made more sense to me, especially early on, and they were those feelings of a kind of connection with the otherness of things and the divinity of things. And
does that include souls, do you think? Do you believe that... I know a lot of people write into you on Red Hand Files talking about whether they feel that their loved ones who have deceased are still around in some sense. Do you believe that? Do you believe that after we go, there is something left behind?
I don't know. I don't know about that. I know that that I certainly did. It certainly felt necessary for me to. I mean, I had those. I certainly had those feelings of, and I would talk to my son, and but whether that's true or not, I think that they are necessary, or they certainly help lead you back to the world. These feelings, and so I have great respect and compassion for people who have these feelings, and people who have spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs, and their great need, that is looked down upon by. I was just for some punishing myself by watching Dawkins talk about the lack of dignity in these sorts of religious beliefs, and that it was like like having to have a baby with a dummy, and it just seems like such a heartless view of things to
kind
speak
of atheist,
of,
fundamentalist.
to speak of people's deep needs in that way, and it's very much, I think, holding on to these things that may not be true, that are the very things that lead you out of that place.
It's almost like a different kind of truth, isn't it? I mean, we mentioned politics earlier, science, religion. There are all these sort of different ways of seeing the world, and actually, even in your lyrics, your symbolic lyrics that are so poetic and kind of get around things rather than just describing them as they are directly. It's like there's a different kind of truth that you can get through writing a song, or maybe there's a different kind of truth you can have through a religious belief. And do you feel that people are sort of convinced of their own ways of seeing the world and stuck?
I think so. I mean, that word truth is pretty tricky, and it's not really something that worries me too much. The truth in songwriting, I'm much more, I guess, concerned with authenticity in songwriting, that it feels real and that it feels like a belief that's sincerely held within the songs. That moves me much more, so that when I listen to a gospel song, even though I may not buy it, it still has the capacity to move me because it feels sincere. And once again, my songs don't have to make arguments they don't have to make a case for anything. They just have to feel true and have to feel authentic.
This opening up that you've gone through in recent years, to people talking more, coming here, where is it headed, do you think? What happens next for Nick Cave?
I don't actually know about that. I've never really had a very good sense of that. I'm just... The thing that I do really well is to involve myself fully in the particular task at hand. And so that's and not to worry too much about the future. And so I really don't know.
So you're not. I mean, I'm sure you're being asked on all the podcasts, and you're sort of on the cusp of talking a lot more. You're not tempted down that road. I mean, is this a test case
to do a podcast?
Well, no, but to talk more. I mean, you did those in conversation events. You talk beautifully. People obviously respond to it really incredibly well, and I think for the reasons I was mentioning, that it sort of breaks boundaries. Do you think maybe there is a role for you outside music as well as...
You mean to go on people's podcasts, their dodgy podcasts?
To talk more, write more.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I haven't done this very much, I have to say, and or this kind of an interview, which seems to be beyond just the normal interview for me. I mean, I've done thousands of interviews, rock and roll interviews, but this sort of kind of conversation seems to be about other things, and it is in itself an art form to some degree, to be able to talk openly.
Which you're very good at.
Well, I don't know about that, but it's kind of you to say. But and so there is there's something about sitting down here that's challenging in a different way for me than to just do 6 rock interviews because I've got a record coming out or whatever. That feels there's a sort of excitement around talking openly about ideas and so forth. That seems, I have noticed that some of the people that I have, without really going into names of people, a kind of podcast. They seem to become the nuance goes quite quickly when you're doing certain types of podcasts, I think. There's an audience capture that goes on, expectations of what you need to think and what you need to say, and if you're putting yourself out there, you need to hold this position on this thing and this position on that. And I don't think in that respect I'm very good for podcasts, in the sense that I don't come along with a particularly sort of prescribed package. I just have my feelings about things, and they tend to free float. And so do you understand what I mean?
It's a dangerous journey.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
You see it all. You see it with podcast hosts, how they very quickly become radicalized. Yeah, they become the very thing that they were told they were in the first place, which they weren't. It's a weird journey, and beware, beware, Freddie.
Still here.
If you ever need someone to talk to sort of reel you back in.
So I'd like to go back to the very first answer, which was, I think you were saying on the one hand you like to fuck people up, and on the other hand you understood brokenness. And that's a very interesting dichotomy. Most people in their kind of life journey understand brokenness a bit later. But I wonder if you could talk about your journey of understanding brokenness, because the other thing you said that was very interesting was that you were fascinated by Christ at a very young age, and Christ is the symbol of brokenness in many ways.
Yeah.
So did you understand brokenness very early? Where did that come along in the journey?
I may have had some basic understanding of what that might be, and our flawed nature and abstract notions about these sorts of things, or theoretical notions about these sorts of things. But it was only after the death of my of Arthur, that I understood it fundamentally that I inhabited it myself, of someone who'd been dismantled, and so I think that's the thing that changed everything for me. Did that answer your question?
Did you understand broken? So when you talk about what did Christ represent to you?
Well, he
What did he symbolize to you?
He symbolized to me different things throughout my life, but mostly mostly the scene that really resonates with me is the scene of Christ in the garden, and the withdrawal of God, and the crying out into the void. That had that's always had a huge emotional impact on me. Not so much that I really relate to it, I just find it incredibly compelling that this man who was in Holy Week, who enters Jerusalem and is lauded as the Son of God, is in the pretty much the next scene is kneeling in the garden, completely abandoned and alone, and I find that really compelling, in so many ways.
I was wondering if you just comment a bit on your relationship to Leonard Cohen's work.
This is Leonard Cohen, in case you didn't hear. Leonard Cohen.
Of Leonard Cohen, yeah. I mean, I've always been a huge fan of Leonard Cohen. I grew up in a country town in Victoria. It was bright and hot and Australian, but I had feelings about things that didn't correlate to the environment that I grew up in, shall we say. And it wasn't until I heard Leonard Cohen played to me by a friend one day. They'd found this record, and the moments, that was Songs of Love and Hate. I was maybe 14 or 15 or something like that. And the first song, Avalanche, I stepped into an avalanche or something. This voice came out that had this gravitas to it that just blew me away. And that particular record is absolutely fundamental to me. He also had a journey from being very dark, very angry kind of records to something which were more, they were gentler and more resolved or something. But I do like that first record most of all. It had a huge, the Songs of Love and Hate had a huge impact on me. I never met him, unfortunately. But
do you listen to any incredibly embarrassing, cheesy, tinny? What's the least Nick Cave thing that you ever listened to?
I don't know. No, I don't.
No, okay.
Good try.
There's a guy here.
Hey, I love in Into My Arms when you talk about angels and you bring in angels into it. And we've talked about Christ and we've talked about brokenness of humanity, but there's this kind of in-between spiritual being, like the angels and the saints, I suppose. Like you say in that song, I don't believe in them, but what do they mean to you?
Well, there's a whole, in regard to things like that within the Christian religion, there's some weird stuff, right? The Christian religion in itself, to me, is deeply strange, and there's a whole lot of fantastical sorts of things that are in it. But I kind of like that too. I like the strangeness I like the sort of challenge of believing or handing something of myself over to something that just doesn't make any sense. And angels are one of those things for sure. I like that aspect of the strangeness of Christianity in particular. I find something in that. I don't know about angels in particular, but I'm not sure I believe in angels.
Maybe. There's a lady over here in a red top.
First of all, thank you, Nick. There was a time in my life when I felt very broken, and your words just meant everything when most people's didn't. So thank you. But I would say something else about your words. They often made me laugh, and I wondered what makes you laugh.
My words. No, I mean, it's funny because, like Leonard Cohen, actually, we're both humorists, probably beyond anything. I mean, admittedly, Songs of Love and Hate isn't that funny, but it's certainly got something going on in it. But and it's often struck me as strange, I guess, that someone who I see myself, much of what I do is essentially comic writing. You know, I sit down and I know that I'm writing like a funny song, and there's not many musicians that do that. You know, yet I'm seen as, you know, a dark. Did you call me that? Someone called me dark. Yeah, you know that it's all kind of bleakness and darkness, but so. Thank you for seeing that.
Seeing the funny side.
Seeing the funny side of things.
Jacob, I recognise from UnHerd, deputy editor.
Jacob from UnHerd. Nick, thanks for that. You spoke earlier about feeling a sense of completeness now.
A sense of what?
Completeness. You feel complete. I just wonder whether, do you feel complete?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question.
And I suppose the follow-up to that, which probably isn't as good a question, is if you do feel complete, do you genuinely think that an artist can create something in that sort of state of mind? I mean, looking back at some of the music and art that you've created in those times when you weren't necessarily feeling as complete, I mean, it's fantastic. And I sort of wonder whether you can create good art when you are feeling that whole.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, and I even when I said that word,
I think you said more complete.
Yeah, I didn't feel. Yeah, you know, it always strikes me as that we always feel wherever we are at this point of time, this sort of sense of arrival somewhere. But you look back and you realise that it's just never been the case. I am always looking back with a sort of faint feeling of embarrassment at what I was up to even a year ago. You know, and I guess this is so you have this feeling of arrival, but I don't think you ever really arrive. I do have a kind of feeling of repetition, I guess, that I'm circling around certain ideas and coming back to the same things over and over again. But yeah, completeness wasn't.
You've also just been propelled by this drive for the new. It seems like, you know, you from the town in Australia where you grew up all the way to launching your first career, leaving Australia, reinventing yourself, new styles, new horizons. Like, something in you is propelled forward.
Yeah, I wouldn't use that word reinvention either. I just think it's there is well, first of all, I work with people who are extremely creative and risk takers, like Warren Ellis, for example, is a born risk taker with music, and so I have people that I'm on a journey with, And he simply will not go near anything that he feels we've done before musically. So that pushes me in that way to some degree. And I feel that same way about words too, that they need to reflect where I am authentically, as we were talking about. And that changes, you know. And there's nothing in trying to do the thing that you've done before. I mean, it's just a losing battle. So you move forward, forever forward, you know. And if I do have a kind of faint pride in what I've done, it is that I continue to dismantle the things that have gone before by the things that I'm doing now, and that's maybe what the creative the creative process is. It's an act of murder to the work that's gone before.
Not getting fixed.
Not getting fixed and moving on. Whether it's to something better or not, I don't know. I don't really think of things in that way. Just something different.
Yeah, hello. Another question related to Leonard Cohen, I'm afraid. A very famous songwriter said that as he got older, Leonard Cohen's songs became more like prayers. And I know it's something you've talked about on the Red Hand file. Are you conscious of that as you write some of your songs?
They're prayers?
Yeah, that his songs became, and to be cheeky, just another 2-point, just to get another one. I just read a recent interview with you. You said the days of the macho or the slightly macho frontman might be over because you lean into the crowd, you sort of commune with the crowd more than other singers might do. Can you just say something about that, maybe?
No, I think that they are, to some degree, prayers, yeah. I mean, they're not... I think Ghosteen in particular, I don't know what this new record's going to be like, but was really an attempt at the time. I was in a deep sort of existential crisis when I was making that. And it was some way, I feel that record was some way to deal with the spiritual condition of my son who died, that it felt like those songs reached into the unknown toward him. And that felt, at the time of making that record, the purpose of that record. That was it was a way in which I could somehow affect his spiritual condition in a positive way. That's how I was thinking at the time. And as I said before,
like he heard the music.
Well, that he, I mean, this sounds crazy, but I was worried about him, and so I felt that these songs were a way of reaching toward him, and I still worry about that to some degree, even though I obviously also understand that he may not be there. It doesn't stop me thinking it's a difficult thing. I mean, it expands out into everything really, that of course God may not exist, let's say. However, I think on some level that is a detail, you know, it's a mere detail, and it's what we do ourselves that we need to do ourselves in some way to reach beyond ourselves is the point of this sort of stuff. I'm not really explaining that very well, but
I think you are.
Yeah.
I think we all think you are. This actually just makes me think of what we were talking about right at the start, which is that somehow that, in a way, both of the last two questions, which is this search for something more, this for the new, the creative impulse.
Yes.
Which is connected to the religious impulse in a way.
It's the same thing.
and it feels like that was always there with
Yeah.
you. So somehow, even if you're taking heroin and writhing around on the stage and semi-naked, and it looks completely, unrecognizable to sitting on this sofa chatting to me, it's the same impulse, which is sort of somehow saying that, you're looking for more. Is that true?
Yes, that's right, and it's. I mean, at the end of the day, as a songwriter, what I'm trying to do is write songs. And I want to write the songs with the fullest heart I possibly can, and as open to things as I possibly can. And the atheist notion, which often seems like the most rational, I get it, right? I understand the atheist impulse. I have a little, Hitchens inside me too, right? But I'm also, I also want to be able to expand the parameters of what I do creatively to encompass everything. And so that kind of, for me, that the Hitchens is just bad for the business of songwriting. That little skeptical voice, yeah. And so
Your inner Dawkins is being...
my inner Dawkins. It's just bad for art. He won't like that.
You talked a lot about kind of having a kind of pulse on the culture and the mood within the culture. I want to kind of ask about that historically and how it looks now. So from, I guess, the early days of like the birthday party and the Bad Seeds, there's probably a very different set of like orthodoxies you might have been kicking against, unaware or aware of, and how that kind of looks in 2023 and whether you see that as being relevant. I haven't explained that very well.
No, I totally get what you mean. I mean, when we talk about being offensive, or in the punk rock days, let's say where offensiveness was the sacred duty that you mentioned, it was very much to kick against the establishment. That's what was happening, and I think that was not me. I was never doing that. I was never that. I was much more concerned with irritating my peers and people that were, and my audience. And by what I mean by irritating is to sort of ignite their imaginations and get them thinking about things and challenge them about things and this sort of stuff. This felt like the way to make good art, was to confront people. And so I was not really interested in that kind of dealing with through the punk rock thing with Thatcher and all of this sort of stuff, that was the sort of energy behind a kind of hatred of the establishment, and which was the energy behind that music. I came from Australia, which without those same political, I didn't have that political fury, but I was much more concerned with fucking with people on a different kind of a level, a different kind of thing. And I was always sort of at odds with my peers, I would say.
So what's the equivalent today then? You asked about 2023. How do you fuck with people today? What could you say now that would
be
really...
a conservative?
Is that the today's equivalent?
Go to church?
Yeah, you go to church and be a conservative, yeah.
I really loved the birthday party albums when I was a teenager, and obviously the energy and the humour, as other people have mentioned. But what I really identified with was the sense of alienation. And other people from the last couple of questions, it's kind of fits in quite well. I was growing up in Yorkshire in the 70s. I felt alienated for various reasons. I just wonder what it is about your childhood. Do you think was there anything particular about growing up, maybe just because you were in Victoria, or was there anything particular about your childhood, things that happened to you that made you feel as an alienated individual?
I actually had. I grew up in a country town, and for the first 10 or 11 years, everything went beautifully. I had loving parents. I had a free-range childhood. My mother used to just kick me out of the house in the morning and say, come back for dinner, and I would just, it's like a Spielberg movie of the kids on their bikes and all that sort of stuff. It was a very free, very beautiful, uncomplicated, happy childhood. But there was something inside me that started to started to sort of attract trouble. And as soon as I became 11, 12, high school, I just felt not so much alienated, but I had to burst out of this fucking country town that I was stuck in. And things just became, I just ignited in a wholly different way.
So it's like a restless energy.
Yeah, and a need to just get out. And that happened. I got basically kicked out of high school, and I got sent to Melbourne to a boarding school, and that was a whole other set of disasters. But there was that, it wasn't alienation so much as a need to get away from the sort of small, what I saw at the time as the smallness of things.
And you don't feel that anymore?
Oh, I think I still feel that, yeah, on a spiritual level.
Mm.
So just riffing off a few other questions, you teased that you were going on tour, and it occurred to me that one of the overlooked aspects of being creative is deciding what to perform, deciding what you're going to express on a tour when you're preparing a tour or anything like that. And with the context of describing that your attitude towards people and the world had changed quite radically over the last few years, when you look back on your body of work, are there songs or periods that you think won't get an airing anymore? And if I could be cheeky and challenge you to be specific on why.
I think he wants you to name your least favourite song.
No, I think you want me to name my most problematic songs. Is that right?
I'm not getting at that per se, no, but
well,
you can go down there if you like.
No, I mean, there's certainly songs that I wouldn't play these days that I wrote before, but earlier on. But it's not because I'm worried about what people might think about them. They just were written by a 19, 20-year-old kid, and they're just not very wise songs. And they're just saying things that I have absolutely no idea what I'm even trying to say within those songs. They just sort of sound good, and they, so there's songs like that I just couldn't engage with anymore. So I don't really play that sort of stuff. But there's a lot of old songs that I still play because they are exciting to play, and I still feel something about them. But
are there any songs you don't like? When someone comes and says, I love this, and does your heart sink and they go, I wish you hadn't said that?
There's songs I like less. I wouldn't like to say, it's a bit mean, isn't it? To your songs. But there's some extremely famous songs in regard to my catalogue that that is not perhaps my favourite stuff.
Okay, well, we'll have to guess.
I don't like to say, it just feels... they may also be the songs that people really treasure, and they think, oh, God, I've liked...
We can probably all understand your profound religious faith, but we might have difficulty with your support for the church as a bureaucracy and an organisation, given all the difficulties both Catholicism and Anglicanism have had. So, as it's Holy Week, can you explain?
That's a very good question, and it comes up all the time. That people just won't have it. Like, just look at what the church has done, and of course it's responsible for some heinous historically, and to this day it's. But for me, I find once again, I find that there's so much about the church, there's so much about Christianity that's difficult for me to, to accept. I mean, there's so many different levels that to sit in a church with all this stuff around it and to somehow be moved, it seems like an achievement in some way. It's, even though all this stuff, here I am. And there's something about that.
It's almost like a rebellion, it's a defiance.
Well, I mean, I don't want to try and, I'm not a historian, or I'm not someone who knows too much about theology and these sorts of things, or historically about the church and all of this sort of stuff. I don't want to make a case or defend the church. I can only say that there's something about the distance travelled from sitting there with my skeptical self in this quite possibly completely corrupt institution and finding that I can actually walk out of there having a transcendent moment is something. For me, that's something that I don't get. I don't get it. I don't get it sitting in a park, and I don't get the same thing watching a sunrise. It's a different... I sometimes get the same thing listening to music. There's something about music itself that does this, that is authentically transformative. But yeah, so I guess that's the answer to that.
It is interesting how many questions have been about this. We have spent a lot of time on this, and you mentioned the archbishops. You were interviewed by Rowan Williams and subsequently by Justin Welby. That hasn't come out yet, I think. But
no, that hasn't come out.
So, does any part of you worry that the Christian aspect is going to sort of take over? Are you going to alienate legions of fans from earlier decades who are suddenly like, what's going on with Nick Cave? He's talking about God and Christ all the time. Do you worry about that?
No, I don't. My manager might worry about it. He's over there. He's just going, but no, I don't. I really don't worry about that. And anyway, I've been going on about this stuff for years. It's just that I mentioned that in the book. I think maybe 30 years ago, NME sat me down, the music paper, and sat me down and said, for an interview, and said, right, before we start, the editor says, none of this God stuff, right? And that was just, so this is not new. I just happened to write a book where I got a beautiful opportunity through conversation with Sean O'Hagan to expand on my beliefs in that way. And they were news to me too, to some degree. That's what conversation can do. You can you can find things out about yourself.
You hear yourself saying
that. Yeah, I mean, the things that I said to Sean were extraordinary in a way, because very quickly through the course of conversation, I changed my opinions about things all the time. And he said, well, 2 weeks ago you said yes, and now you're saying no. And that is the great beauty of conversation, that you hear yourself say things that that feel like they mean something, and others that are just patent nonsense. You've got to get that stuff out of your head.
A few years ago, you said as you were getting older, you were becoming more and more obsessed with sex. Is that still true? Can you speak a little about that?
Just as obsessed, but not as often.
Okay, well that is a great note to end on, ladies and gentlemen. We talked there about conversation. This has been a fantastic conversation. What we have witnessed, I think, is someone who is open, searching, and just putting himself in front of us, honestly asking whatever we throw at him, which is an amazing thing to do. And it's been really thrilling to do it with you for the last hour and a half.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Freddie. Really, thank you. Thank you for coming along.